Hello, everyone, and thank you for joining Made in Baltimore for this latest edition of our Tools of the Trade virtual workshop series. This is actually the third in a series of workshops we've been running about building our commercial real estate acumen in the small business community. And we are pleased to be joined today by Michael Singer, co-founder and principal at Singer Damrick Real Estate. How this session is going to go is that Michael will be giving us a presentation for the next 20 or 30 minutes or so, and afterwards we'll open it up for Q&A with the presenters. We ask that everyone leave their microphones off during the presentation. If you have any questions that come up, to simply drop them in the chat, and we will address them after the presentation is complete. Let's see if there are no further questions. Oh yeah, I should also state, for the record, if you are new to these workshops, they are being run by Made in Baltimore. Made in Baltimore is a program of the Baltimore Development Corporation. We are a program that exists to support small makers and manufacturers in Baltimore City and grow our city's buy local movement. So we're grateful for everyone in attendance today, and especially for our presenter. Really quickly about Michael. Michael Singer has spent the last 20 plus years solely focused on the representation of companies that occupy real estate for the operation of their own businesses. He's well known as a creative problem solver and is often sought out for his knowledge, expertise, and unbiased support of businesses throughout the Baltimore area. I had the opportunity to meet Michael at a networking event about a year ago, I might say, and I was impressed not only with his expertise in the matter, but also his commitment to working with small manufacturers in kind of the light industrial real estate space, which is, of course, represents a lot of the members of the main Baltimore community. With that, I'm going to hand it over to Mike for his presentation. And like I said, please leave your microphones off, and we will handle any questions after the presentation. Mike?
All right, thanks, Adam. And I really appreciate that intro of me. I don't know who wrote it, but it's fantastic. And I'm hoping that you could get me a copy of that when we're done. I may have to use that. All right, I'm going to try and share my screen now. Adam, can everybody see this screen? Okay.
I can see it.
All right, great. All right, so thank you, everybody. Happy Halloween. I'm Mike Singer. I'm a partner at Singer Damrick Real Estate. The purpose of this presentation is really to help you think about commercial real estate, not just finding the right amount, but building out all the costs that you could possibly incur before you make a commitment on the actual real estate, whether that's by lease or purchase. That is a mistake that we see a lot of early stage companies make. They fall in love with real estate, they commit to real estate, and they don't realize all the potential costs that are involved. They get too much space, too little space. We're going to cover all these topics today. So we're going to talk about defining your space, the actual square footage and size. We're going to talk about location strategy. There's a timeline to acquiring real estate and building it out and getting your operation up and running. We're going to talk about different types of real estate and what's permitted in each one. We want you to understand who the players are in a real estate transaction. There's actually a good number of people that could be involved in different roles. And then we're going to help you pull it all together. We're going to share some common mistakes, and that will conclude our presentation.
Mike, I'm sorry to interrupt real quick. Since you're the host, I forgot to send a reminder around keeping an eye on the waiting room for admitting late folks. Just keep an eye on that if you can.
Okie dokie.
Thank you.
How do I do that? Okay. So the first thing you need to do is figure out how to define your space specs. How much floor space do you need? What are you doing on the floor? And are you racking? Are you racking up? That there's a direct correlation with the racking and the ceiling height you will need in your property. You also need to think about loading docks, right? Like how are raw materials getting in? How are finished goods getting out? Do you need a loading dock where a 53-foot trailer can roll right up to it? Do you need, we could, in this picture, you'll see that we call these drive-in doors. Do you just roll in, roll out? How many do you need? Thinking about your workflow and your layout. Another thing that's very important is power. Some of the buildings that you may look at may not have enough power to to support your manufacturing equipment. So these are really, like, when you think about what's in the box, these are the core tenants that you really got to think about when you're about, define it, figure out what's right for you before you start your space search. And then there's some more secondary things. HVAC. Many light industrial and warehouse and even some retail spaces don't have HVAC in the warehouse. They may have it in an office portion. Do you need that in your operation? Who pays for that? Is it existing in the building? If it's not, it might be a cost to you as an occupant. You need to think about how much office space you need. Are you going to have a storefront? Do you have people coming to you, customers coming to you, or not? Um, you need to think about parking. So parking in iOS. iOS stands for industrial outside storage. Are you storing trailers outside? Do you, how many cars do you need to park? Those are all things that can affect your operation. And then zoning. Certain buildings will not allow certain uses based on zoning. For instance, if you are making some sort of consumer packaged good or food and you want to manufacture in your space, but you also want to have a retail storefront on a main street area, the zoning may not allow you to grow that manufacturer into a certain point. So these are all things, all variables that we suggest you think about and flesh out and understand before you start searching for space. So now we're going to talk about location strategy. Where is the ideal location? You start with, where are your suppliers? How are the raw materials getting to your operation? Are they at the port? Are they along 95 north of the tunnel, south of the tunnel? You want to cut down that drive time as much as you can. Similarly, where are your clients and distributors? If you're making a food service, is it going to a distribution hub for Giant Food or Whole Foods? You want to be in close proximity as possible. And then your employees, in a really tight labor market like we're in, employees, have a lot of power. You want to be able to recruit and retain the best. Some of your employees may require public transportation. You really got to weave all of these together to figure out the ideal location. In Baltimore, if you're going to, locate within Baltimore City, public safety is another factor, unfortunately. You can get a great rental rate in some areas of lower public safety. We found in our experience, you generally pay for what you get. The lower crime areas usually have higher rent or purchase costs. Some of the higher crime areas, the rents are lower. Certain areas also in Baltimore City have, you can qualify for municipal incentives. These are empowerment zones, enterprise zones. You can get sometimes low interest loans for capital improvements. You can also get tax credits for job creation. We also think that you should weave in amenities, right? Like, where are you going to get your farms from? You need your Royal Farms. You got to be close to a Royal Farms. I'm kidding. We don't just need Royal Farms, but some of these light industrial parks, some commercial property locations, there's nothing there, and employees sometimes want to be able to go for a walk, go to a gym close by, go to a restaurant, go to a convenience store. So amenities in a really low unemployment environment like we're in right now, can be a nice differentiator. It can improve the quality of life for your employees while you're there. So we're going to talk about timeline now. So the typical timeline, we believe, ranges from 18 to 15 months. And I'm going to walk you through that now from the point of project kickoff, right? You've done the things that we've mentioned in the previous slides. You've thought about the space and the loading and the parking. You've thought about your suppliers and your clients and your employees. You got a good sense of how much space you need and where you want to be. At that point, you would begin a market survey of all of those options. You would try to narrow it down to a handful of buildings to actually conduct property tours and property inspections. And that whole process can be done in 1 to 3 months. When you narrow it down to hopefully more than one building that you want to consider, we always recommend having a plan A, a plan B, and a plan C, so you can have a healthy competition between these landlords for your business. You enter into the proposal negotiation stage. You can request proposals from them and negotiate those proposals back and forth. While you're doing that in this 2 to 3 month window, you can be doing construction pricing, figuring out what needs to be done in the space to make it ready for your use. Structural work, it could involve mechanical engineering, structural engineering. It could involve a general contractor or just subcontractors. But this is a really, really important point right here, because in the proposal and negotiation stage, you still haven't committed to a building, but you can build out all the costs within reason that are involved in getting you in, getting you operating, and costs during the lease term or occupancy term. So then you get into the lease negotiation, you select a building, you've had 3 proposals from 3 different landlords, you've negotiated down to one and you sign the lease, you negotiate the lease and you sign the lease. And at this point, you are now committed to that building. You are under lease. That process could take 1 to 2 months. And you'll see our little Halloween friend. I used AI and I typed in grumpy monster and it spit out this little guy. So the grumpy monster has emerged because at this point you are spending real dollars. You've signed a lease or purchased a property. You are committed to this property and you begin your soft construction and hard construction. Soft construction is typically architectural, MEP, mechanical, electrical, plumbing, and a permit. And this could take, that's soft. And then hard construction is really labor and materials. It's actually getting the work done. And this process could take 2 to 6 months. In Baltimore City, it could take even longer because getting a permit, if you need to get a permit, and that gets fleshed out when you're going through your design, getting a permit could take 3 months, it could take 6 months, it could take longer, unfortunately. So after this period, you then have a period of, we call it FF&E install, furniture, fixture, and equipment. You have to get that in, you have to get it running. That could take another month, and then you can open for business. So on the short end, 8 months, on the long end, 15 months. It might even be a little bit longer depending on how long the space search goes. And also if you want to purchase a building when you go into due diligence, but please allocate enough time so that you can really flesh this out. If you do your construction pricing right, there's not going to be surprises over here down the road.
Mike, I want to just pause for a quick second and do a quick waiting room check. Do you mind?
Yeah.
At the bottom of the screen where you see participants, there should be, if you click on that, a waiting room list.
Nobody's in the waiting room.
Great, then we can keep going. Sorry for the interruption.
No problem. All right. So now we're going to talk a little bit about different kinds of real estate, just as a quick FYI. What you're looking at here, we refer to as true warehouse space. The ceiling heights are very high. They could be 22 to 36 feet. Um, these buildings are built like sheet cakes. Like, how many slices do you want? We call them bays. And so a bay in a building like this, the minimum square footage in some of these larger warehouse buildings could be 10, 20, 25,000 square feet. They're very deep. They usually have big truck courts in the back, and you can rack to the ceiling. You can rack very high. Um, buildings like this, we call these flex buildings. They are a little bit more, they lend itself to like a true storefront for customer interaction. They usually have a warehouse in the back. The ceiling height is much lower. It could be 14 to 16 to 18 feet. And you usually see more infrastructure in these buildings. You might see more HVAC if you go out and look for them. The bays in these buildings can be, call it 2,500 to 3,000 square feet. This is a traditional office building. They may allow ground floor retail. The upper floors obviously would be office space, but they would be very restrictive on any kind of heavy duty manufacturing on the ground floor. And then you got your traditional retail space, which is very, very client facing, consumer facing. The rental rates in strong demographic areas, wealthy demographic areas, the rental rates could be very high. All right, we're going to talk about the players here. So when you see a building that with a sign out for lease or for purchase, that building is owned by a landlord. You call the name on the sign, and that's the landlord's broker. Probably a very friendly person who will meet you out there for a property tour. It's important to know that as friendly as they are working for the landlord. You should confirm with them who they represent. The landlord broker oftentimes says, "What do you need done in the property?" My landlord has a design team. They have architects and engineers. They have general contractors and subcontractors. We could get done. We'd price out and design whatever you want, and then we'd figure out how to make a deal. The good thing about this architect and engineer and contractors are they're generally familiar with the building and the existing conditions. But it's important to remember that their client is not you, it's the landlord. And lastly, you've got an attorney. These landlords have attorneys where a landlord broker will negotiate the business terms of the deal. The attorney negotiates the actual lease or purchase and sale agreement. So the documentation. So this is really the landlord's team in most situations. You're allowed to have your own team. So who's on your team besides you? You're allowed to have your own tenant broker. So imagine for a second going and buying a car at a car dealership. You buy a car every 5 years or 10 years or however long. Imagine if you could bring your own car salesman to negotiate with the car salesman at the dealership. That is the situation in commercial real estate. You can bring your own broker to represent your best interest and show you all the properties that meet your criteria in the marketplace. They are your eyes and ears to the market. They can negotiate on your behalf. Good tenant broker knows what the market rents are, what's fair, what's unfair, what's reasonable, unreasonable. Their goal is to get you just the best overall set of terms. That could be rent, that could be concessions. Interesting point about commercial real estate. Like in residential real estate, landlords pay both brokers in a commercial transaction. So the tenant broker's accesses a portion of the landlord broker's fee paid by the landlord. So using a tenant broker doesn't cost you anything directly. There's no out-of-pocket cost to work with a tenant broker. We highly, highly advise people to work with a tenant broker. And one more thing you should know, many tenant brokers also represent landlords. So there is the potential for conflicts of interest there. Key takeaway is ask brokers who they represent. Ask about conflicts of interest because you don't want to get caught in that. It's not illegal in commercial real estate. In court of law, it's illegal. You don't want to have the other guy's attorney advising you in court in commercial real estate. It's totally legal. Similar to a landlord, you can retain your own architect and engineer, general contractor and subcontractors, and you can retain your own attorney to actually negotiate the contract. Tenant broker does deal terms, attorney does contract terms. So we're gonna talk about pulling it all together now. How much should you really spend on real estate? And you'll see our grumpy monster's back because we're talking cost. If you're like me, you don't like to spend money. Um, According to the National Association of Manufacturers, of your total spend, 5% to 15% should be spent on real estate. And that includes not just rent, but your operating expenses, which we will get into. This is a good benchmark for your planning. So what's a rent budget, right? Like you look up a building online, you do a Google search, you look on LoopNet, and you see a great building and it says the rent's $10 a foot, and you're like, great, I can afford this. This works for me. When landlords and leasing reps quote a base rent, it's literally just a base rent in most instances for light industrial, retail, and warehouse space. The lease structure that you'll see most often is called triple net. It's written out as triple net or NNN. And so this is a requirement of the tenant to pay its prorated share of all common expenses for the building. So you're in a 100,000 square foot building, you occupy 10% of the building, 10,000 square feet. That landlord is paying the real estate taxes, the building insurance, and maintaining the grounds. They take all of those expenses, bundle them together as triple net expenses, or sometimes called CAM expenses, and they pass that through to the tenant. You should budget for this. And then there's other expenses that the landlord's not even involved in. You would have a contract for your own utilities, probably with BG&E. You have to pay for Wi-Fi. It's not nothing. You may need janitorial service or dumpster service. Some lease structures have roof repairs included in CAM, some do not. Same with HVAC maintenance. If you've got HVAC units on the roof, the landlord may say, we don't maintain them, that's an additional cost. So it's important when you're evaluating a building to ask and ask and ask. Tell me every single solitary possible cost. I want to know what it is before I make a commitment. And then this is what the model looks like, right? And so we assumed 5,000 square feet. We assumed a base rent of $10 a foot. Almost all leases have an annual rent escalation. So even if you can afford, and it makes sense for you for $10 a foot in year one, year two is $10.30. By the time you get up to year five, you're paying $11 a foot. You should budget for all of your expenses. We don't have them all in here with Wi-Fi and dumpster. Well, we do have dumpsters, but you should budget for these. The landlord may know the answer. If they don't know the answer, do your research, spec it out, make sure every single solitary cost goes into this model, and build in inflation. We typically use 3%. In the past couple of years, some of our clients have said, let's build it to 4 or 5% just because the cost of everything's going up. It's going crazy. And you can see it increases over time. So in year 5, your $10 rent is really $11.26. And then there's another $5.18 in operating expenses that you have to pay. And so over the term, you're paying, $387,000. Some of you may be interested in purchasing. And so we're pulling it together. We put together a model to help you understand purchasing and the benefit of it versus leasing. So and what we did was we said, what if we take our $10 rent right here and turn it into a mortgage payment, into annual debt service? So we backed in using pretty traditional bank loan terms, an 8% interest rate, a 25-year amortization, a 25% down payment. This is a cash payment in year one. And we sort of backed into how much real estate can you afford? So if you want to have a $10 a foot annual debt service, you can afford a $719,000 building purchase. And if that property appreciates 1%, which might be conservative, over 10 years, at the end of 10 years, you have $351,000 in equity. Not bad, but you got a big down payment and you've got some other costs we'll talk about. So this is a very similar model to our lease model, but instead of base rent, we have debt service. And the nice thing about debt service is it's flat. It doesn't escalate like rent does. You got to account for your down payment. So you'll see that is a big line item in year one, but you still have all the same costs that you have with leasing, and you should probably budget for some base building repairs. So there's a concept in commercial real estate of capital replacements versus capital repairs. And when this is really getting into the weeds, but in a triple net lease structure, your landlord can pass through a roof repair, but they can't pass through a roof replacement. That's the ideal scenario. But when you own the building, you need to park some money for building repairs, base building repairs. So you'll see an additional line item there. And yes, unfortunately, expenses go up. We always suggest that you be very conservative with your projections over time. If the actual cost goes down, great, but it usually doesn't. So better to be prepared. So when you pull it all together, that same building costs you 570, that same 5,000 square foot building to purchase. You can purchase it for your total cost over the 5 years would be $578,000. So what are we really getting at here? This is sort of your point of indifference, right? If you're saying $10 a foot is our target number, if you can buy this building for less than $719,000, it may make sense to buy it. But if your target is $10 a foot and it's $1.5 million, we would suggest not buying the building. If you are not in a cash position to fund a $180,000 down payment, you probably want to lease. It's more expensive to own, but long-term, you're going to build equity. There's one more budget to think about, and we touched on it with capital costs, right? If you're leasing, most landlords want to put as little money into the building as possible into the tenant-specific portion of the building. This is your branded, customized, in-the-box space. Because if you leave, someone else who comes in may not see any benefit to any of it, and the landlord needs to rip it out. There's also base building improvements. Base building improvements are the utilities, the power, the plumbing, the trenching. You might need gas that has to be provided to the suite. to your box by somebody. The landlord may say, I'm not providing this, or you can sometimes push back on them and say, look, that benefit, that added value to the building runs with the building even after I leave. There might be a compromise there. And then the other thing that you need to budget for are your FF&E, the physical move, buying equipment, getting it installed, getting it tested, and then also things like signage, right? You want to have a nice sign outside the suite entry. You may want to have branding on the inside. You may want to have wayfinding on the inside. So there's lots of expenses. These are cash expenses that you actually incur before you even occupy, and you should budget for them. So this is what it typically looks like. You've got your soft costs, design, engineers, your permit. There may be some hard costs, right? Like you're doing paint and carpet in the office or adding a bathroom, doing some trenching, bringing additional power to the circuit, to the suite. You probably need to pay for some signage, the FF&E infrastructure. You need to hire a moving company, right? How are you going to move your equipment? And then you may be growing, so you're going to want to budget for whatever equipment you're going to buy, manufacturing equipment, and then Wi-Fi. You need the connectivity in the space. So it leads to a gross capital cost. We call it gross capital cost of $252,000. So in addition to the rent or the down payment, you should budget for this amount of cash outflow. When you lease, there are concessions that you can get in the marketplace. Sometimes landlords will provide an improvement allowance. Sometimes they will provide a couple months of free rent. These are things to ask about. And depending on where you're looking in the city or the broader market, these change based on supply and demand, how high or low the vacancy is in the area. So in this model, we said the total concessions are $6.66 a foot. And our math is wrong here. I apologize, but our math is right here. So the net capital expense to you in this scenario is $219,000. This is cash out the door before you even occupy. So let's talk about some common mistakes. There's a lot of them. We tried to just hit the best ones. Common mistake number one, falling in love with a building or a space. You're looking around on the internet, you're looking around forever, you're like, oh my gosh, this is the space. We're here to tell you it's not the space. There's going to be others. If a landlord or a seller is being unreasonable, try to create more time and search out and find that other space. People make bad decisions when they fall in love with real estate. Not identifying all occupancy costs and capital costs prior to committing to a property. If you could see this right here, this is a dead horse, and that is a bat that's beating him. I know we're beating a dead horse here. That's the best graphic I could come up with. Not allowing yourself enough time. If you time it right, you can come very close to not paying rent until you're ready to open. If you time it right. And so that goes back to doing your due diligence on construction and permit and design. And it can also allow you to get competitive bidding and best pricing. Save yourself some dollars on the construction. Not understanding who's who and who's representing who. Always ask. Can't stress this enough. Utilize third-party experts. Okay, they know what they're doing in their different verticals. They're going to save you a tremendous amount of time. They're going to lower the risk. and they're going to help you have a better outcome. For the early stage companies, signing long-term leases or even purchasing a building, if you think you're going to grow, you're either buying too big of a building or signing for too much space or too little space. So there's a good chance you could outgrow it in 3 to 5 years. For the early stage companies, we think short time commitments will benefit you. Not understanding the market. A lot of these submarkets in the area have varying degrees of what we would consider health, high vacancy, low vacancy. Many of the landlords out there, they're savvy real estate investors. People think, oh, this landlord's distressed, commercial real estate is collapsing. It's not always the case, and you're going to look bad if you're not informed. And in conclusion, our good buddy Sun Tzu, Art of War, said, a goal without a plan is just a wish, right? Plan, plan, plan. Get all the details out way ahead of time so there's no surprises after the fact. Being a Jewish guy from Pikesville, I love a good Jewish proverb. Man plans and God laughs, right? You could do everything right and something still can go wrong. So this is who we are. This is how you can connect with us if you'd like any of the slides or if you want to talk about commercial real estate. If you'd like to visit us in Towson, we have pretty good coffee. We've been known to have the occasional beers stocked in the fridge, as well as sodas and beverages. We love talking commercial real estate with business owners, early stage companies, companies that are big supporters of Baltimore City. Feel free to contact us. Happy Halloween, everybody, and thank you for your time.
And thank you, Michael, for that presentation. I feel like I learned so many things there. I want to do a quick ask for one more waiting room check, just in case anyone wants to join for the conversation, and then open the floor to questions from attendees. Did anyone have thoughts or questions that came up during the presentation? And if not, I've got a few I can start us off with. Michael, talking about the triple net and the CAM costs, what say can tenants have about those costs during lease negotiations? Like, for example, I've heard of folks that have signed on to a lease with, an estimated CAM being presented to them, and in subsequent years, that CAM cost is ballooned. Are there any things that ways that tenants can protect themselves from that?
Yeah. I mean, there are some landlords are willing to cap that increase year to year. The devil's in the details. That's all part of the proposal and lease negotiation.
Okay, that's good to know. Um, my second question was around down payments. I know when I was buying my house, I think I had to put 10% as a down payment. You were, I think, talking about 25 in your model. Is 25% pretty typical for commercial real estate?
Yes, and we'd suggest everybody talk to your bank or your credit union or any kind of lending source, but you usually see between 20 and 30% down.
Got it. And then my third and final one I wrote down was about lease terms and how businesses should think about like the length of their lease terms when they're signing on and what effect that might have on their negotiation process.
Good question. So the longer the lease term, typically you get a lower rental rate. But those rents escalate every year. And so if your rent escalates on a constant and the market goes like this always, right? Up and down, your rent's going like this, you're below market and then you're above market. And so you're really locked in. And it doesn't mean you can't try to renegotiate, but it can really put you in a jam. You pay for what you get. If you get a super low rental rate on a 10-year deal, you're locked in for 10 years, and it might not be super low in each of the 10 years. One way around that is trying to negotiate contraction options or a termination, an early termination option. And so that's a concept that a lot of landlords are willing to at least entertain. The devil's in the details, right? Like, what's the fee to exercise? There's almost always a fee to exercise the options, almost always. Sometimes there's no fee, but almost always. So at the outset, before you even commit to a building, you can negotiate a termination option if the landlord's willing to allow that, and run the math to say, okay, instead, I'm gonna have a termination option at the end of year 6 of my 10-year term. It's equal to 9 months of rent. Oh, that's a pill to pay, right? But I'm terminating my obligation on the remaining 3 years, 3 months, right? And so for each business, it's a little bit different, but that's a nice tool to introduce that can really benefit you later in the lease, in the back end of the lease. And some will do a 5-year term with an out after 3, or a 10-year with an out after 5, or a 10-year with an out after 7. There's ways to get creative and really build some flexibility depending on what the business owner's objectives are.
Thank you for that. Those were the 3 questions I had. Open it up to anybody else. Or instead of questions, also curious to know if anyone on this call is currently seeking real estate and wants to share anything about their process.
It's crickets.
Yeah,
Everybody's
maybe
out
not a talkative
trick-or-treating.
bunch today. Uh, that is fine. Perhaps they're just still digesting everything that you shared, which was plenty in there. Um, I'll give it maybe another, minute or so for people to chime in. Yeah, the chat is also available if anyone wants to put questions there. Don't want to come off mute. But otherwise, I think we may be able to wrap this up. And just once again, thank Michael for coming and presenting today. I also want to acknowledge the other person on camera, Micah Damrick, the other half of Singer Damrick Real Estate. Thank you so much for also attending. These two are a wealth of knowledge and information. Mike, would you mind well, your information was on that last slide, so I assume you don't mind people contacting you if they have questions later.
Not at all. Not
Great.
at all. We'd love to help.
Okay. And like I said, the recording of this will be posted on our YouTube channel in a matter of weeks, and then we'll send that out via email to our member newsletter distribution list. So once again, thank you, Michael. Thank you, Micah, for attending today. Thank you, everyone else, for showing up and learning. We appreciate you, and I am going to end the recording at this point.